And Lula, to our Brazilian friends who worked on this team for great organization of the summit and for their hospitality at this meeting that gathered together the majority of the Global South countries. Within BRICS, the last year, BRICS was chaired by the Russian Federation, and I'm sure everybody considered this chairmanship as very successful, and I'm sure Brazil's chairmanship will be evaluated as highly. For the first time, the summit featured not only full-scale BRICS member states, but also partner states. This category was established after the Kazan summit meeting in October 2024. That's Belarus, Bolivia, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, and along with partner countries represented at the summit. Brazil, as chair of the Union, invited to certain sessions a whole number of Global South and East heads of states. There is a list of those who were invited to take part in BRICS Plus and Outreach format sessions. And traditionally, also invited were heads of UN secretariats, World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization, as well as management of the new Bank of Development, Asian Bank of Infrastructure Investments, and Latin American Bank of Development. Speaking of the results of the summit and documents signed, we all agree that numerous challenges of today cannot be efficiently resolved without the countries of the Global South or the global majority. In this connection, everybody noted the role of BRICS as the platform for coordinating the approaches of the global majority as one of the key pillars of the multipolar world order, which is objectively replacing the outdated globalization system. And as President Putin recently said at a BRICS summit, the previous system was exclusively designed to serve the interests of the so-called golden billion. This is now becoming history, as everybody is guided by principles that BRICS advocates as the foundation for a true multipolar, mutually beneficial cooperation of all countries. We have similar approaches and stances on key international issues, and we are commonly committed to forming a more stable, multipolar world order that relies on UN Charter principles and not selectively, as our Western counterparts do, using only what fits them in their yet another venture. The principle of the UN Charter, it must be used the way it was written by its founding fathers and the way it was ratified many years ago, in all its entirety and integrity. The leader of BRICS presented a report, a resulting report, and speaking of specific aspects of international agenda, we were united in our opinion that it is inadmissible, admissibility of Israeli and American airstrikes delivered in violation of international legislation and the UN Charter and in violation of all IAEA security reservations. And the statement passed after the first day of the session. All BRICS members spoke in favor of stopping any hostilities, not only against Iran, but also in the Gaza Strip, where the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. And everybody feels that the Israeli army is going to operate not only in Gaza, but also on the west bank of Jordan River, which severely undermines the very prospect of creating a Palestinian state. The UN decision, two-state approach, and we will continue to make sure that nobody tries to forget those resolutions. The resolution reflects many countries' position regarding Ukraine. Everybody spoke from very weighted positions, realizing the root causes of the crisis, which are threats to the security of the Russian Federation, which had been created for a long time, for decades. The expansion of NATO to the east, with the goal of taking in Ukraine. We need to cancel all decisions passed by the Kiev regime after 2014, aimed at legally exterminating all things Russian, including the state language, the culture and literature. And recently they've been trying to abolish the traditional Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Special attention was paid to reforming the complex approach to governance, including the long overdue reforms in a number of institutions, so that those reflect the true weight of the countries of the world majority in the global economy. And demands were voiced. The consolidated BRICS position is that the reform of quotas and votes should be expedited in the IMF. We draw public attention to the need to stop the practice currently used in the IMF. This practice is that the first to get financing are countries that are, puppets of the West. This was shown in the case of Ukraine. The financing from Bretton Woods institutions over the last couple of years significantly exceeded the amount of resources allocated for all African countries, which is a crying shame for the international system, for the International Monetary Fund, for the World Bank. And we're paying a lot of attention to the reform of the World Trade Organization. And Director General of the structure, Todros Ghebreyesus, told us about the progress of the reform, which is going to make the Secretariat less bureaucratic and more efficient. And we also paid attention to the need to avoid politicizing this establishment, which should first of all deal with preventing epidemics and infectious diseases. In this context, the documents of the discussion reflect the goals of protecting the environment, including the context of the Framework Committee on Climate Change, which has taken place here in Brazil, in November. This conference is going to be the 30th, and it's very important that everybody agrees that we need to avoid dominance and dictatorship in this sphere as well. The West, as you know, has been rather efficient in convincing developing countries to spend more and more on the so-called green transition by hampering their social and economic development. Structures as the new Bank of Development, the BRICS Business Council, and the BRICS Women's Alliance, and the Civilian Council. Heads of those divisions spoke during the summit, reporting on the progress made in their areas. Of course, those mechanisms play a very significant role, and their work contributes greatly to the contribution of relationships among our countries. In general, we highly evaluate the progress made by BRICS so far in this year. It's not only this summit, it's dozens and dozens of sectoral events divided by areas of economy, arts, artificial intelligence, and so on. A statement was made on artificial intelligence, emphasizing the need to work out regulation mechanisms in universal formats under the auspices of the UN, not in behind closed doors meetings. Also announced was BRICS partnership to combat social diseases. It was the initiative of Brazil in reaching our agenda, and I'm confident that this will be another positive experience. As for our developments in artificial intelligence and healthcare, we're going to promote them in international formats, including the World Health Organization and the United Nations. Brazil's chairmanship is not over yet. There's a whole number of events, expert and ministerial level events. Soon we will have meetings of chairpersons of Supreme Courts, heads of customs and tax authorities. And in 2026, India will take over chairmanship. With my Indian counterparts, we discussed the plans currently in development. I think they're very promising and they ensure consistency of chairmanship for 2026.
The new format of the BRICS summit is relatively new. It is new in the sense that the partner countries are taking participation, and they're different from guests in that they're going to be permanently present at all BRICS events, not only summits and ministerial meetings, but also most sectoral discussions and sectoral formats devoted to different aspects of our economic cooperation and various humanitarian issues. That is the main difference. And this number of participants is not news for BRICS. They also participated previously, but as part of BRICS Plus or BRICS outreach formats, or they used to be invited participants. In Johannesburg, I think it was in Johannesburg a couple of years ago, when invited countries included heads of governments and states of at least 50 countries participating, and steering such a big forum is certainly challenging, but the new quality of participation for the 10 countries that were designated as partner countries at the Kazan summit is certainly a new step in the development of our association. And we will do more work to make sure that they are included in our day-to-day affairs as much as possible. A question from Russia 1. Even before the summit, Western media started saying that a BRICS expansion is diluting the association's capacity to present a united front on many issues. And one of the events called symbolic is that President Putin and President Xi did not come. What is your opinion about this? Well, I think they are reflecting on what's happening, because the NATO expansion did not benefit anyone, including the members of the North Atlantic Alliance themselves. The differences between them are getting bigger. There's an uprising brewing in the bowels of the alliance, and everyone is pulling towards their own side. But nothing like that is happening at BRICS. There is no threat and no dilution of our values and of our ideas. BRICS has always stood for equality, a mutual respect, and consensus. Consensus that truly reflects the balance of interests and not dictated by the big brother. So I cannot support such attempts to describe BRICS as an organization that is somehow fading in significance. On the contrary, its potential is only now beginning to come into play. By the way, a lot of attention has been paid to reforming global governance mechanisms at the summit. And the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and their issues, as well as the World Trade Organization, were all discussed at the summit. But compared to previous years, a reform of the United Nations was discussed particularly. Well, obviously, the Security Council reform was most relevant. And there is a need, confirmed by the joint positions, to address the lack of representation for Asian and African and Latin American countries at the Security Council. And the West has long held domination that was not deserved in terms of the real balance of forces in the international arena. But for the first time, there was very detailed discussion of a reform of the United Nations Secretariat. And there is a direct criticism regarding the prevalence of Western countries in the management positions at the Secretariat. I gave the examples. And there are several dozen Under-Secretary Generals, but the key positions on whom the real functioning of the Secretariat bears, and which really have an impact on the agenda, the key positions are held by NATO countries. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is Portugal. There is also an Undersecretary for Political Affairs. She is a US national. There's also a position for peace keeping France. There's also one from the UK. And the first Undersecretary is a citizen of Nigeria and the United States at the same time. Now, when Secretary General is promoting his idea in development of the resolution adopted at the last session on our common development agenda. And now, in development of those principles approved by the United Nations General Assembly, the UN 80 concept is being promoted, and that outlines practical steps to reform the Secretariat, which requires close attention. And this process is to be supervised by a person. A special position was created. A special undersecretary position was created to monitor these transformations. And what do you think? It is a United Kingdom national. So our bias is obvious. And these attempts to carry out a reform as part of the UN 80 process, and trying to make sure that intergovernmental bodies at the United Nations General Assembly are not informed about the decision-making process, and trying to make it a closed process are obvious. And Russia and its allies have promoted a resolution in New York to prevent intergovernmental bodies from being sidelined in making important decisions at the UN. Yesterday you had a meeting with your Iranian counterpart. Well, you're tech-savvy, I see. Yesterday you had a meeting with your Iranian counterpart. What format could further contacts between Iran and the IAEA can take, if that is to be resumed? And was Russia's role as a potential mediator discussed? You're asking what format potential talks between Iran and the IAEA can resume. Well, that is the format. Iran and the IAEA, those are two parties to these talks. The country and the International Agency for Nuclear Energy. I had the impression that it was the leadership of the IAEA that should show that it is responsible for the assessments it has published and that were presented to the IAEA Board of Governors several days before the aggression started. And those assessments were characterized by many as, let's say, ambiguous. And unlike previous reports by the Secretariat, they allow for an interpretation that Iran is not performing its obligations in good faith. The Western three, France, the United Kingdom, and they latched onto this interpretation. And there was serious criticism of Iran. And in a day or two, there was an attack on Iran's civilian nuclear facilities, which were covered by IAEA guarantees. So the chain of events is really simple. And the IAEA Secretariat played a role there, willingly or unwillingly. And so now it's the Secretariat that must provide guarantees that in the future it will be strictly guided by the mandate that it has, without trying to to allow itself to be used to politicize the situation and to promote individual members' interests. And as to potential mediation, President Putin has reminded that when the comprehensive plan of action regarding the Iranian nuclear program was adopted, it included the possibility for Russia to offer services relating to the neutralization of uranium to bring it down to a level that would be accessible, to be acceptable for energy use. And after the United States unilaterally withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran did not have any obligations to restrict its enrichment operations. So now we just reminded everyone that we have the technology to offer these services, that we can take the excess of uranium that was enriched beyond a certain level, we can take it to Russia and to give it back in a form suitable for energy use. And if the parties are comfortable with Russia offering its services to help bringing the positions of the United States and Iran closer, to help restore their dialogue, Oman has helped, and a number of other states, of Gulf states, helped trying to make this possible. But let's not forget that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was adopted and that was approved by every party, that was lauded by the international community, it was developed with the participation of Europeans, Americans, Russia, and China. So if the main figure here, Tehran, is willing that, then we will be able to do that too. Even before his inauguration, President Trump said that BRICS countries will face 100% tariffs if they introduce their own currency. And yesterday he threatened all countries that, as he said, pursuing an anti-American policies will face similar tariffs. So will there be a BRICS currency? What do you think about Trump and and his response to BRICS? Well, what do you mean by what about Trump? President Trump is very open about his objectives. He stands up for the United States interests, first of all, economic interests, investment and trade. And that is something he says very clearly. And that is yet another testament to the fact that it is a model of globalization that the United States have pushed for a very long time, and that used to be accepted by everyone for a very long time. As to payments as such, BRICS has never discussed creating a currency in and of itself. There is a work underway on alternative payment platforms. It was proposed during the summit in Johannesburg, and President Lula promoted it. And the proposals by Brazil went pretty far. It was proposed to put in the declaration the specific potential forms and mechanisms and alternative payment platforms. But as a result, the central bank and the ministers of finance were instructed to create proposals on such alternative platforms, and that could be independent of the dollar, which has a situation, which has a position in the global economy, which started to be abused under Democrats. As President Trump prepared for his inauguration, he directly accused President Biden and his party of undermining the role of the dollar, which is now a reality for years to come. The trust in the dollar has been eroded, and it is an actual fact. Over 30 years or even more, we heard that the dollar is not a property of the United States, that it's a common good of humanity, ensuring the smooth operation of the economy on the global scale, and that the United States guarantees are clear and understandable and acceptable to everyone. But now we see that they can decide and punish anyone at any time. And I can give many examples, but I won't. Even those viewed by an ally of the United States can no longer be sure. And as for BRICS, a currency was not discussed. But we did have a discussion on the increasing profile of national currencies, and it is a process that is underway. And a new investment platform, a trans-border payment initiative, together create a menu of possibilities to avoid a dependence on the dollar and the euro as well, because there are no guarantees here either. At the first summit in Rio, President Putin gave the figure 90% of our trade and financial ties with the BRICS partners and with our partner countries, 90% of settlements are made in the national currencies of these countries. So it is a very good kind of guarantee, and this process is now seen in our relations with other countries as well. And all of that is the consequences of those actions that were taken to punish Russia. They destroyed all the principles that underlied international trade and investment, including the private property, the presumption of innocence, a good faith competition, and all of that was thrown under the bus. Now we're seeing a fragmentation of the entities that were created during the era of globalization, according to American standards, and everyone accepted them until they started to be abused.
Minister Lavrov, in the resulting BRICS declaration, for the first time explicitly condemns attacks against Russia's infrastructure. It is an unprecedented wording for a statement from such a versatile bloc. Does it mean that BRICS countries are unanimous in this regard, and that a new consensus is formed about an inadmissibility of striking civilian objects? And does Russia plan to use this statement to evoke investigation these attacks in the UN? Well, if it's written down in a declaration passed by heads of states, it's not even about forming a new consensus about the inadmissibility of strikes against civilian objects. Those strikes are banned by many conventions, including the Geneva one, late 1940s. It applies not only to civilian objects, but to civilian population as well, especially children. So it shouldn't be perceived as something out of the ordinary. It's just affirmation of commitment to international principles long approved by the international community and long neglected by the West, long ignored by the West. And they've been getting away with that, especially those who enjoy the protection of the West. First of all, the Kiev regime, but those were so glaring examples when peaceful railway infrastructure and civilian passenger trains were attacked deliberately, then it must be condemned. And it's impossible to overlook that, or pretend to overlook that, as officials in the Human Rights Council in the UN tried to do. As for investigation and holding the culprits accountable, we are not trying to push this topic on the international arena. We are doing this ourselves in the prosecutor's office and with the help of public organizations. And we have been publishing, obtaining materials in the UN and in European organizations, and everybody will be held accountable.
Minister, I'm Felipe Frazão from O Estado de São Paulo newspaper. Thank you for having us. I would like to ask you a question about, given the fact that President Trump suggested to impose 10% tariffs on BRICS countries, how this might impact Russia's proposal for BRICS to develop an alternative financial system, and what is Russia's view on the Brazilian decision to decelerate the discussions on payment platforms and the new BRICS common currency for international trade. And as my colleague just asked you, I would like to ask that BRICS just mentioned in the final declaration recent a strong condemnation on explosions in Russian territory. They mentioned a strong condemnation in this context of the war with Ukraine. How could the BRICS stance spoil the mediation proposal from Brazil and China? Thank you.
Which proposal by?
The Chinese and Brazilian proposal of mediation, the 6-point proposal, which was made last year by.
Well, as regards the first question, there is no such thing as Russian initiative. As I mentioned, answering one of the previous questions, the emphasis on developing alternative payment platforms and mechanism was first made in the declaration of the summit in Johannesburg at the proposal of President Lula. And he wanted a much more active work on these issues. Eventually, it was decided just to authorize the central banks and the ministries of finance to present recommendations on alternative payment platforms for the future summits, and this is what we have been considering. It is not something which only Russia is interested in. President Lula, by the way, is promoting similar initiatives in the context of CELAC, and we know this. And in CELAC, the discussions are much closer to the concept of a currency than in the context of BRICS. And this is understandable because CELAC is geographically coherent structure. So we, frankly, we don't see that there is some kind of deceleration. Not at all. And statistics which are being reported to the leaders, they show that the amount of deals which are serviced without using the dollar, this amount is growing, and percentage of these deals in the context of the overall trade is growing. As regards Brazil and China,
as BRICS mentioned, strong condemnation with explosions in Russian territory in late May and June.
oh yes, it was condemned, and I just was referring to this.
But this might spoil the Brazil and China's proposal for mediation in Ukraine.
You mean Brazil and China in favor of bombing peaceful infrastructure?
No, I mean that they have a proposal on the table, a 6-point proposal for mediation, and if the BRICS stance with their involvement may spoil the proposal, future of the.
You mean, I don't understand, how can a position of principle in defense of international conventions prohibiting attacks against civilian infrastructure and peaceful citizens, how can this position spoil any initiative with good intentions? We discussed with our Brazilian and Chinese colleagues the evolution of the Brazil-China initiative. We noticed, for example, that at one of the meetings of the group of friends which was created by China and Brazil, which met in New York in March, unexpectedly France and Switzerland participated. And France, of course, is one, if not the most favored country in the front run attacking Russian Federation, insisting on continuing to pump weapons in Ukraine. So it is the Chinese-Brazil initiative was valuable from the very beginning because they said we want a neutral, objective consideration. And this would be a counterbalance to the unilateral initiatives which Ukrainians were promoting together with their Western masters, including so-called Bürgenstock process and Zelensky peace. I think, to the benefit of the group of friends of peace in Ukraine, to keep its principles, as you referred to in this paper which was circulated. And of course, we hope that since we touched on Ukraine is the only country, the only one, where a language, especially an official United Nations language, is prohibited in all areas of life. Education, media, cultural events, and so on and so forth. Russian language, after the coup took place in Ukraine in 2014, has been persistently exterminated by law. No such an example exists in any other part of the world where there are some conflicts. Israel, Palestine, no other conflict where this would be a characteristic exists. And this grossly violates the United Nations Charter, which says, Antonio Guterres, I talked to him today, he said yesterday again that everybody must respect international law. And then he says territorial integrity of Ukraine. But this territorial integrity principle means that nobody cares about the rights, inherent rights of the people living on those territories. The Charter says respect of human rights, irrespective of race, gender, language or religion. Russian language and canonic Orthodox Church in Ukraine are prohibited by law. And I said, look, the West, who always teaches everybody about human rights, including you, us, China, Venezuela, everybody, they never use these words, human rights, in relation to the situation in Ukraine. On the contrary, Ursula von der Leyen, the Skaya Kallas and others, they have been saying that Ukraine, fighting against Russia, defends European values. If European values are about canceling a culture, it's back to Nazism. And therefore, to recognize the reality as regards the human rights violations in Ukraine. But our friends from the Global South, who are interested in promoting their own initiatives, of course, they can be in the front of the fight for human rights, not as the West wants, but as the United Nations Charter requires. Thank you.